is the most beautiful word you know. We have 11 spoken languages in South Africa. Sometimes you don't need to understand or speak a language to know exactly what it means. In Afrikaans sê die woord deurmekaar spel so lekker en is soveel beter as die Engelse woord 'n mes, want dit klink mos deurmekaar. And in English, the word rubbish sounds more descriptive than the word nonsense. When it is time to knock off, nothing sounds better than when South Africans say, "Ke chai laat uit." When in total disbelief, all South Africans know the Zulu term, "Hai khona." Last but not least, you know that everyone in South Africa understands some sign language. You know that finger? Good morning, Dumelang Thobela Molweni, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 2021 Language Awareness Week. Before we begin, I would like to share some housekeeping tips. On your right-hand side of the screen, you will see a small white button. If you click on this, you will see the chat and the Q&A function. We would like to engage with you and see your comments in the chat. If you have a specific question, place it in the Q&A section. This is really great because you as the audience can upvote more pertinent questions, so the popular questions are moved to the top of the screen. To enjoy optimal viewing during the presentation, you can click on the small box in the top right-hand corner. This will expand the presentations if you would like to view them more clearly. To get seated at a table, just double-click on any of the open seats. Without further ado, enjoy the Language Awareness Week, where language is celebrated. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to view one of our celebration videos. When we are out of presentation mode, at the bottom of the screen, click on the logos and you will be able to see the videos in full.
Ke bua ka puo ya Sesotho hore ke manole jwalo ka ho thwe sefate se tsejwa ka ditholwana, mme nna ke tholwana e nngwe ya sefate sa Sesotho. Ke re ho setjhaba le batho, puo ena ya Sesotho ke puo e monate e loreng nka e abela mang le mang a kgallang ho e tseba kapo mang le mang a nang le hona ho ka rata ho utlwisisa. Hobane Sesotho ke puo e monate jwalo ka rona Basotho re kgantsha ka bo rona, re apere kobo, re tlatsa kgotso, re anamisa kgotso setjhabeng. Batho ba ka una tse molemo ho tswa setsong sa rona le bothong ba rona re le Basotho, hobane re kgantsha ebile motlotlo ka puo ya rona. Mme puo ya rona ha e ka sebediswa botjhabeng le ditjhabeng tse ding, ho ka ba bobebe jwalo ka rona re le Basotho re tlise bohlale ba rona, re kgone ho una bohlaleng ba bathong ba bang jwalo ka ha bohlale bo sa rekwe. Etswe bohlale ke lefa le loreng ha le na theko, empa ke re puo ya Sesotho ke puo e hlokolotsi haholo, eo ha mang le mang a ka e tseba, mang le mang a ka kgona ho hlalosa, a ba a hlalosa ya kenella ditabeng, di-television le di-radio hore o kgone ho bua ka yona. Ke puo ya Sesotho leleme le monate.
We would like to welcome everyone at this session. Even though we have a number of short presentations that will be shown throughout this session, we tried to structure it in such a way that we can have as much interaction as possible. So please feel free to raise comments and suggestions in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen while the presentations are shown, and to discuss your comments and questions during the panel discussion or the table discussions later on. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Kweti Kaiser. I'm a lecturer in the School for Language Education, and my co-presenter and I were part of a team that developed a short course on multilingual pedagogies for Northwest University lecturers last year. We have therefore been grappling with many of the questions that we will be discussing today ourselves, and we look forward to making sense of these very complex and sometimes contentious issues with you during our session today.
Good morning, dear colleagues. My name is Dolly Dlavane. I lecture Setswana in the School of Language Education. We're going to kick off with the session by watching a video presentation which demonstrates the tensions that exist in the use of African languages specifically in this case, Setswana and Sesotho, in the teaching of academic African languages. The video is important to remember as the discussions that are coming up have implications on it.
Good day. I would like to introduce our presentation for this conference this morning, Balancing on the Linguistic Bar, Scaffolding Academic Discourse from English to the African Languages and Back. Now, we could have called this process skating the half pipe and back, and we use this analogy right through our presentation, as you will see. Most of you are familiar with Vicento and Hornberger's 1996 publication on the language orientations of language policy, where initially language was seen as a problem because students were expected to assimilate to the hegemonic language, which was English. This was then countered with language as a resource, where the linguistic repertoires of students were encouraged and applauded. That moved from language as a resource to language as a right, which then focused on equality and inclusivity. Finally, we've added to this model and we've created an idea of language as a responsibility, which we all have to share. What does this mean, language as a responsibility? Well, firstly, the language policy in higher education in South Africa has created a new framework for all higher education institutions to follow. African languages have to be used for high status functions, and this includes the academic domain. What does this mean for our institution? Well, for Northwest University, we promote functional multilingual language environment using the official languages of the university, which are Setswana, Sesotho, Afrikaans, and English, which are used for teaching and learning, research, and administration. In addition, all faculties have to develop language plans aligned with the language policy. The Faculty of Education have mandated us to create a short learning program in multilingual pedagogies for staff across 8 faculties. And this aims to consolidate awareness of multilingualism and its implications for learning and teaching, facilitate the development of disciplinary concepts and general academic discourse by building up discursive resources, and allow a more culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy. What we have encountered in teaching this multilingual pedagogies course and in conversation with the participants on the course have been tensions in the use of the African languages. Our mandate has been twofold: to use the African languages as much as we can in teaching and learning across all 8 faculties, but at the same time, we have to contribute towards the intellectualization and development of a formal academic discourse in the African languages. And we found that very often there's a tension between these two, because the students use a particular variety of the language and are not necessarily familiar with a formal academic variety. So we have created scaffolding to fill the gap between the two. And we will show you this and demonstrate this now in the model. So here's our U-shaped model, working from FADE, which is Formal Academic Discourse in English, which has traditionally been translated directly into FADAL, which is Formal Academic Discourse in the African Languages. But we found this had problems because students did not recognize the formal terminology that was developed on language boards or in terminology units, and then filtered down for use in the academic domain. These terms that were made here were unfamiliar to students. So we have created 3 intervening steps, which is part of scaffolding, and which we feel are very important. And our lecturers did some of this on the Multilingual Pedagogies course, which my colleagues will explain further on. SAID is simplified or scaffolded academic discourse in English. So basically, from there, we moved to a simplified form, and my colleagues will explain how we do this, through to the classroom itself, where students translanguage, TL stands for translanguaging, using their own languages, leveraging upon each other's languages to understand the concepts, and then recreating this discourse into simplified or scaffolded academic discourse in the African language, which can then become completed to become the formal academic discourse in African languages, where terms are found for the paraphrases that happen at this point. I now hand over to my colleagues who will take it further. Thank you.
For the purpose of this presentation, we will start the half-pipe on the English side, as most of the formal academic discourse that lecturers and students use is in English. However, the hope is that eventually this will become a two-way process, which can be approached from both sides, depending on the language used in source texts. Lecturers engage with formal academic texts on a daily basis, and especially when they do research and when they design and present module content. Due to the start of the COVID pandemic in 2020, lecturers also had to adapt their teaching to scaffold students' online learning. The question then became how to scaffold students so that they could access formal academic discourse, mostly in English, fade or fade, when English is not their mother tongue. The initial assumption was that lecturers could make these academic texts, such as journal articles, study guides, and glossaries, available to students on the university's online learning management system, and that students would be able to engage successfully with these texts in their learning. However, the reality is that most students struggle with the language and the difficult concepts in these texts. As an introduction to a short course on multilingual pedagogies, we had sessions in which we discussed the language policy and plans of the university, and we also had sessions and activities to create awareness of multilingualism and multilingual pedagogies. We then asked the participants to reflect on difficult concepts in their different fields of specialization based on the formal academic texts that they use in their modules. Participants worked in groups and created posters to provide feedback on their reflections. It became clear from the feedback that most of the groups were able to identify difficult concepts and could use strategies of teaching English across the curriculum to unpack concepts, but they struggled to see how other languages in the students' repertoires could be used as a resource to unlock difficult concepts to students. How then do we move from formal academic discourse in English, fade, to scaffolded academic discourse in English, SAID or SADE, utilizing African languages? During different sessions of the workshop on multilingual pedagogies, which also had to be converted to an online course during the COVID-19 pandemic, we demonstrated and discussed different strategies to simplify discourse and utilize students' multilingual repertoires in the process. These strategies included the use of concept maps, decoding concepts using etymology, morphology, and root words, and also strategies that included forward and backward translation of concepts into African languages in order to help students conceptualize difficult content more effectively. This is one example of a lecturer in business economics who identified key concepts in an excerpt from a journal article and first simplified those, and then the concepts were translated and back-translated with the help of Setswana lecturers. We will use this example to illustrate the navigation through the different steps of our U-shaped academic discourse model. The first step that the lecturer took was to simplify and scaffold identified concepts. In this instance, the concepts of strategic orientation, distinct topologies and constructs, and viability, by paraphrasing these concepts. The lecturer therefore guided the students from the more complex formal academic discourse in English, fade, to a simpler version, SAID. Next, the identified terms were forward and back translated into the African language, in this instance Setswana, so that multilingual students could discuss these explanations, definitions, and grapple with these concepts, utilizing their multilingual language repertoires, which brings us to the next part in our the academic discourse model, and that is translanguaging.
In sticking to an analogy, what happens at the lowest point of the half-pipe is that the potential energy of the skateboarder gets converted to kinetic energy. This kinetic energy can be observed in the form of high-speed movement, which can be likened to students who actively make meaning of subject content as they are allowed to tap into their fluid linguistic repertoires. The point of translanguaging at the center of the half-pipe refers to multilinguistic activity that stems from the speakers up and not from the languages down. In the South African context, students may typically use multiple languages interchangeably and in strategic ways to make meaning. As the African languages of the country stem from two principal branches, the Sotho-Tswana branch or the Nguni branch, one cannot stick to a monoglossic view of any of the languages that stem from either branch. Students often effortlessly switch from one African language to another, and from an African language to English, the dominant medium of instruction at higher education institutions in South Africa, or even to Afrikaans, which is another indigenous language of the country, and back between these languages in their engagement with academic content. Therefore, the reference to fluid linguistic repertoire. This includes students' home varieties of these multiple languages as they zoom up the other side of the half-pipe, coming to the Sadal stage, which my colleague will elaborate on in her presentation that follows on mine. This practice, in other words, the constant move between different languages in the quest of learning, is referred to by Cummins as cross-linguistic interaction. Cross-linguistic pedagogy refers to pedagogical practice that supports and encourages students to draw on their full linguistic repertoire in the classroom. Cummins states that cross-linguistic interactional and instructional practices engage and also valorize students' multilingual repertoires, including their home varieties of the mother tongue, as well as the other languages in their repertoire. The implication is that the eventual movement to Fadal in any particular African language may end up being out of sync with the terms and phrases that students generate themselves through interaction.
This is a practical example of the continuing movement in the pipe from Sade to Sadal. The phrase strategic direction translates as tsamaiso ka tsela ya maano. In this context, tsamaiso refers to the way things are done, while tsela ya maano refers to a way of strategizing. The phrase tsela ya maano use possessive particle to relate the two words tsela and mano. Tsamaiso and tsela ya maano are conjugated by the instrumental particle ka to relate the two words to make meaning. The English phrase comprises 2 words, while the Setswana phrase comprises 5 words. The length of the Setswana phrase tends to be longer because of the necessary use of the 2 particles to relate the words in the phrase to form a simplified phrase. The simpler the phrase, the more the words. African languages, including Setswana, use more of particles and concords to relate the words in the phrase. The phrase people in the business act in such a way to ensure livelihood and sustainability translates as batho mo kgwebong ba diragatsa ka tsela ya go netefatsa botshelo le itsholelo. Batho mo kgwebong refers to people in the business, and diragatsa ka tsela ya refers to act in such a way, meaning the manner of doing. Ba is a subjectival concord that relates batho and diragatsa. Then the term go netefatsa refers to ensure, which means to make certain. Botshelo is translated from livelihood. In this context, botshelo means living in subsistence or effect. The term itsholelo refers to sustainability, meaning long-lasting. In this context, itsholelo refers to long-term or durable. Moving down the pipe from Sadal to Sade, from Sadal to Fadal, the phrase tsamaiso ka tsela ya maano is longer than the Fadal phrase. The formal academic language in Setswana uses fewer concords and particles, and uses terminology by coining and creating words, for instance, deverbatives. Now, deverbative noun tebelelo, which refers to looking at or focusing on, is more semantically dense in meaning than tsamaiso, which means ways of doing. Tebelelo ya mano refers to strategic orientation, which is another way of saying direction. Rather than the simpler term, the more dense term is used. The possessive particle ya in tebelelo ya mano is used to relate the two words. The second phrase, batho, mo kgwebong ba diragatsa ka tsela ya go netefatsa botshelo le itsholelo. There are more particles to relate the words in the phrase to make meaning. 6 particles are used to make the phrase meaningful in Setswana, and their semantic values are value differ. English and African languages are different structured languages, and therefore we find the particle in Setswana always add to the meaning and qualifies the meaning. Go is the prefix of an infinite noun. Go netefatsa means cause to become true and to make certain. The particles are more generic that are used. They are less semantically loaded terms. As compared to the Sadal version, the Fadal version, kgonagalo ya tiro, is shorter because it has only 3 words. No particles or concords, more than one are used. Moving from scaffolding in Sadal and Sade, the two are more similar. The Sade is a more compact version in Sadal, which have more simplified meaning. In Fadal, we compacted the meaning into fewer words as we are approximating the academic discourse of English using some terms that are coined or created. The Fadal does not use more concords, and this makes the phrases shorter. And moving down the pipe again from Fadal to Fade, the movement is reversal, is backward. The phrase tebelelo has fewer words like Fade version because it does not use more concords and particles, but rather uses a single term, tebelelo, that has more meaning for orientation. More similar to the English version, tebelelo has more semantic density. It has a number of semantic features like English. The tebelelo term would be unfamiliar to the students as it was coined from a verb. A more familiar, simpler, and informal term, tsamaiso, makes it easier to understand the meaning, while tebelelo has more meaning of orientation and is unfamiliar, more of a formal discourse. Mano translates as strategy. The possessive particle ya is important to relate mano in the phrase in order to make meaning. Kgonagalo ya tiro refers to viability. The Fadal phrase has 3 words, whereas the English Fade is only 1 word. The Setswana version uses possessive particle ya to create meaning. There is not much scaffolding like in Sadal and Sade. Both phrases are shorter than Sadal and Sade phrases. The meanings that makes it longer are actually twitched out, and that ends up in longer text in a scaffolded text. There is no one-to-one equivalent between African language terminology and Western language terminology of the two are non-cognates. English is highly nominalized, whereas Setswana and African languages in general make use of verbal processes, which leads to longer constructions, but simpler constructions with more descriptive qualifiers. This results in paraphrase in the African languages of terminology in English. Scaffolding of the English academic discourse fits into this process by facilitating translation of the English text into the scaffolded or simplified text in Setswana. both texts use paraphrase when transformed into more formal academic discourse in the African languages. Setswana terms with more semantic features can then be coined or created, which then approximates the formal academic discourses in English today. Scaffolding thus leads to the use of more familiar words for the students and greater use of qualifiers.
In conclusion, we've seen that for true understanding to occur, students need to be able to skate the whole half pipe forwards and backwards. From fade to fadal and from fadal to fade. Once we source original documents in the African languages or they are created, then we can work the other way around from the formal academic discourse in the African language to English, which would be exciting. And finally, I want to share one last slide with you about a research project that has been launched this year, Bakonde, Boosting the Use of African Languages in Education, a qualified, organized nationwide development strategy for South Africa, and it's co-funded by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union. It involves 4 South African institutions, higher education institutions, and 3 European ones. And it's focusing on capacity building in the field of higher education. What we want to do is facilitate and promote the use of African languages as mediums of instruction at universities and colleges, set up African language development units in order to do this, which we will then cascade down to other South African HEIs. And we're hoping for a washback effect onto primary and secondary education eventually. So please visit the website, Bakonde at USAL. It is being driven by the University of Salamanca in Spain, and then our website, Northwest University, ACZA. Thank you very much. And I sign off.
Thank you. Let's watch the video.
Here we go. We had some fun with our skateboard and half-pipe analogy, but we also grappled with a number of issues associated with utilizing different languages in the process of learning and doing that in an effective and sustainable manner that would also aid the intellectualization of languages that are not traditionally associated with tertiary education. And that is quite a challenge.
Bakoti, let me indicate that we have invited 3 scholars in the field of multilingualism. We have with us here Dr. Noma Khosazana Hassana, a senior lecturer at the University of Nelson Mandela, correctly said Nelson Mandela University,
Yes.
at the Faculty of Education, Kebeja. She offers home language and first additional language pedagogy to undergraduates and postgraduate students. We also invited Professor Theo du Plessis and Prof. Langa Khumalo, who have both done work in the field of multilingualism to share their knowledge and expertise regarding the intellectualization of African languages, particularly in institutions of higher learning. Our first presenter on the video will be Professor Theo du Plessis from the University of Free State, Professor in Language Management and Professor Emeritus in the Department of South African Sign Language. And the second speaker is Professor Langa Khumalo, Executive Director of SADILA at the Northwest University. It will really be interesting to hear how these multilingual scholars unpack the challenges and successes of presenting lessons in African languages. Dr. Kaiser.
Thank you. Okay, so we have two pre-recorded sessions, and Dr. Hassana is here with us today. Our pre-recorded session, the first question that was posed, so we took a step back. As you see at our university, we try to implement part of our language policy, and we would like to really utilize African languages as part of student learning in tertiary education. But we took a step back and we said, okay, so the first question perhaps should reflect on is, do you regard multilingual pedagogies as a feasible option to promote multilingualism in higher education? And we also asked them to justify their responses. So let's hear what our two professors had to say about these.
My answer is no. Why do you say so? What kind of multilingualism is being promoted? Individual, societal, institutional, or perhaps feel-good multilingualism? I suppose it depends on what this so-called multilingual outcome is that is envisaged by the institutional language policy. If it is, as most South African universities tend to do, promoting a cozy feeling about multilingualism, about hearing different languages, even in the classroom, talking about the different languages, usually in English, and so on. I suppose in that case, one could say, yes, multilingual pedagogies might be able to promote a feel-good multilingualism. However, turning to individual multilingualism, promoting multilingual pedagogies, promoting individual multilingualism, I find it difficult to imagine how such pedagogies can advance, for instance, the acquisition of a gestural language like South African Sign Language.
Indeed, multilingual pedagogies are one of the many instruments that we can introduce in order to promote multilingualism in higher education. And the promotion of multilingualism is recognizing that language is crucial in knowledge access and knowledge transfer. In fact, language is the crucial enabler in the process of knowledge acquisition and knowledge transfer. So multilingual pedagogies are therefore important because they enable a process where every language speaker has access to knowledge in the language in which they are comfortable in. And that makes it easy for the speakers of these languages to access knowledge and indeed to transfer that knowledge, be it in the form of an examination when they are transferring the knowledge into the paper, be it in an interview when they are transferring what they have acquired in the learning process to their interlocutors. So multilingual pedagogies are indeed an important option in the quest for multilingualism in higher education.
I think we've seen that there are two very different views, and Dr. Hassana, as soon as she joins us, I'm wondering, are these really opposing views, or is there a way where we can integrate them? Because on the one hand, I hear Professor Du Plessis saying that, the feel-good multilingualism, which is quite important and something that we realized during online teaching, that social presence, having a teaching context where learners feel welcome and they feel that they can bring something, they can contribute something to their classrooms. So that feel-good multilingualism on the one hand, and then what Professor Kumalo said in terms of knowledge acquisition and knowledge transfer, and the importance of the role of language in those processes. So, Dr. Hassana, do you think we should split the two, or is there perhaps a way in which we can integrate them?
Thank you, Dr. Koti Kaiser. To my view, as a country with many official languages, as a country with many official languages, it is very important to understand that for allowing other languages to flourish is a social injustice to other languages. I wouldn't take the stance that a professor has underlined, the feeling good attitude towards multilingualism. To me, multilingualism is necessary. Remember, there are many languages, especially African languages, which are at the periphery of education and knowledge building. And if we say it has to be feeling good attitude approach, that is not constitutionally correct. If we want to have all citizens of South Africa to be at the same par in language pedagogies, in knowledge design, not only acquisition and transfer, in knowledge design, because we have to design these knowledges according to or using our own languages so that you can have full access, not be at the periphery when it comes to learning, as well as coming up with new ways of knowing. So to me, multilingual pedagogies are necessary. And if you can use the approaches of social justice through multilingualism, as well as a social approach to develop these multilingual pedagogies and even the curricula, then we'll be able to see also African languages flourishing, not translating things from Afrikaans or other languages into isiXhosa. I'm an isiXhosa speaker, so I'll use my isiXhosa examples back to English. Because if our kids, our students are taught African languages from grade R, at home, grade R, up to university, there won't be a need for us to translate from English back to isiXhosa back to English, because we would have developed the concepts, the content knowledge of whatever we will be dealing with, from economics, social, political, educational, health-wise, across disciplines in our own languages. So there are only two languages now that are enjoying the central stage, which is English and Afrikaans. Yet African languages, they are still not used in our higher education settings. And also our students are struggling to make sense of what is written in other languages. So to me, multilingual education is very important. And when I designed my honors program for multilingual and multicultural education, I used the social justice approach, and I also used the social approach in multilingual pedagogies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassana. Yes, these are quite complex issues, and I'm wondering if someone in the audience at the tables would like to comment on what we're talking about right now. I don't see any chats.
I did check, Koti, there are no chats and still no questions. I wanted to say, to comment on what Dr. Hassana has just indicated, to say I fully agree with her, because one thing that we must remember, that the language policy of the Northwest University is not looking at, making Sesotho and Setswana accessible for the sake of conversations, but it's there to lift up the academic status of both English and Afrikaans, and therefore using multilingualism and multilingual pedagogies in our teachings. We need also to keep that in mind, especially at NWU, because we need to lift the academic, the African languages to the academic level. And also, and hence we say language as a resource, and also to afford our students, epistemological access, epistemic access to the content of the modules. Thank you, Dr. Kesa.
Thank you, Dr. Dlavani. Yes, please go and put your comments in the chat box there. And Professor Marina Reineke said, what do you see as important graduate attributes in terms of linguistic proficiency for students to enter into the workplace, both nationally and globally?
The question is directed to Dr. Hassana, I guess. Dr. Hassana, the question there by Professor Marina, what do you see as important graduate attributes in terms of linguistic proficiency for students to enter into the workplace, both nationally and globally?
Can you repeat the question, because I would like to be relevant to the question?
What
Dr.
do you
Hassana,
see?
if you click on the chats on your screen,
Yeah.
Okay,
you
all
will
right.
also be able to read it.
Oh, yes.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. You remind me, this question reminds me when my niece, we were discussing about her daughter. She was about to write grade 12 that year. And she was worried that she's a Xhosa speaker. She can't write and read anything in isiXhosa. Yet at grade 12, they're supposed to analyze literary genres and also write a paper on grammar knowledge. Then she asked me to help her. And I asked her, why did you not allow your daughter to learn her home language? Read books in her home language, even the Bible in her home language, to develop her language proficiency. Because through input and output, you learn a language and you become proficient. Now, she's worried that she won't get a full metric pass because she has little proficiency in her home language. Why was that? Because she went through an education system whereby isiXhosa was not the language that's supposed to be taught in its full academic standard. It was taught by people who were never trained to become isiXhosa teachers, who fluent in isiXhosa, who knows the linguistics, social linguistics about the language. I'm coming back to the question. The question is, if we want our learners to be fluent in a language, they must be introduced to the language from a very early age. Best methods, best approaches, best strategies. Then that learner will be proficient. And again, we will not be worrying about where are they going to stand nationally, internationally, and regionally, because home language is core to our education system. There are many jobs they can have, whether they want to go and work in other African countries or in other European countries. Being taught in your home language doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be able to learn other languages. For that matter, it has been proven that to know your home language is a springboard to know other languages. And in that way, you can become bilingual. After being bilingual, you can become multilingual. So there's no way that if you say your child, when it is taught in African languages, she won't get any job, because other languages are taught as a subject, just like we did when we were at school. Other languages were taught as a subject, and then after some time, they were taught as a language of teaching and learning. So to me, that doesn't stop you from getting any particular good job nationally, regionally, and internationally. And for that matter, many countries that are using their home language as the language of teaching and learning, they're doing far better than those who have abandoned their mother tongue and only took a immersion approach, whereby they just learn the foreign language because they are racing to get jobs overseas. There's so many jobs. Even in UK, you can teach home language isiXhosa to people who are there who want to be taught in isiXhosa. So there is no truth in saying that if you don't know English, you won't be employed. There is no truth at all. So to me, being fluent in your home language, then you add another language, because English has been taught throughout our education system. So there's no way that you won't be able to speak what you have to speak during the English conversation. And then you can come up with your ways of making your language economical, educational, political, and otherwise. So I would like to say, know your language, add other languages, and be proficient in those languages, especially when it comes to your district, when it comes to your province, when it comes to your national landscape. Then you can learn one or two from the region and then the other one from the international, and you'll be fine, and you'll get the job, any kind of job you would like to venture into, because you have the intellectual access, the content knowledge in your language, in your home language. So home language multilingual education, to me, it's the move. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassana. And I think part of the graduate attributes is also to prepare our students to function in a society that's multilingual.
Yes.
And to communicate with people who might not be from the same language group as you, and to still perform the job effectively. And language plays a crucial role in that. Thank you, Chantal. Chantal commented in the chats. Aronan states that in today's globalized world, a single named language, no matter how big, for example, English, Norwegian, or Spanish, can hardly suffice for all the needs of communication, cooperation, business, education, or any other area of human life. And I think for us is grappling with in which domains do you use which languages, and how do you move between these languages and utilize them effectively for your own learning. And thank you, Erika, also for noticing that in her mathematics classes, how students begin to understand those concepts better. Once the students start opening up in their mother tongue, they really start to unlock and attach new meaning regarding module content. She says they sometimes need a nudge, and perhaps that's part of this hegemony of English. But when you nudge them, they for that contribution too, Erika. But I think we have to wrap up this question. We're getting to Dr. Shalomi Romulus says, I wanted to respond to Prof. Duplessis' answer. I think creating awareness and understanding is the first move and does not mean it's just a cozy feel. Yes, thank you for that, Dr. Romulus. We have to move on to our next question. Dr. Dlavani, can you introduce that question to us, please?
Thank you, Dr. Kaiser. We are now moving on the next question, which was posed as follows. Normally, in a tertiary context, the lecturer is in complete control of the classroom. How can lecturers relinquish control and enable students to take ownership of their own learning if the lecturer can't speak the student's mother tongue? maybe we should give Dr. Hassana opportunity to respond to that, or let us view the videos first. Yes, let us view the videos, and then Dr. Hassana will respond to that thereafter.
Maybe we should first establish the level of multilingual tolerance among students, or in the particular class or grouping, whatever. One gets the impression that the South African linguistic culture is intolerant of functional multilingualism. At how many meetings and events do we hear people say, for practical reasons, let us rather use English, or something to that effect? There are also reports about students getting impatient about languages other than English being used in the class situation at university level, given the growing and actually orchestrated perception that English is the preferred language of higher education in South Africa. And of course, we also need to talk about blended learning models where we do not actually need the all-present lecturer and where knowledgeable student assistants may be utilized in various learning capacities. We at the Free State University have successfully implemented such blended learning modes in teaching South African Sign Language in our department. We use teaching assistants to a good effect, and they in fact play a crucial role in facilitating the language learning process. But in our case, we use South African Sign Language to teach South African Sign Language. So we are not applying any multilingual pedagogy in the real sense of the word, but I suppose one could say we do it occasionally more in the first, less in the second, and little in the third year, relying ever so more on using only sign language within the teaching situation.
I think one of the fundamental things that we have to embrace is that the learning process actually sits with the students. The students are there in those higher education spaces to learn. If language becomes a barrier of that learning, learning cannot take place. So if one of the processes is to embrace, to introduce a particular language for learning to take place, by all means, we should embrace that process, because learning is the primary concern in this kind of environment. Students are already doing that. During the lecture, soon after the lecture, students look at the knowledge material and start breaking it down in the languages that they are familiar with, in the most accessible language. So introducing it in the classroom does not delay the knowledge transfer. In fact, it can co-occur during the classroom in the presence of the lecturer. So indeed, there is not a loss of control per se. It's actually students gaining the traction in the learning process. So it is indeed, in my opinion, encouraged that students do have language as part of the pedagogies that they can quickly access in their learning process. And yeah, thank you.
Dr. Hassana, as we have heard from Professor Langa's video and Prof. Theo, of course, we know that lecturers are in complete control of the classroom, but at the same time, students should be given opportunity to to use their home languages, especially African languages. But now you find that the lecturer himself does not know the mother tongue of those students. What do you say about this? How can they relinquish control so that they enable these students to use their languages to access knowledge?
This is a very difficult one because of the status quo in our societies as well in our educational settings. Difficult one in the sense that you'll find out that in your class or in your lecture hall, especially at university, it's better managed at high schools and primary schools. At university, you get students from all over the world. They come to Gqeberha to study whatever degree they chose to enroll for. Now, there is this lecturer offering meta theories to diverse learners. It won't be easy for the lecturer who doesn't have the repertoire of all these African languages or even other languages that are spoken by learners in the classroom. That's why it sends us back to how can we start rebuilding multilingual classroom in a better way to interact with our students, because we are supposed to be in a position to interact with our students and they interact with us in the language they best know how to use it. And in this case, if our students are coming from Chivenda, Kiswahili, Siswati, and Sixhosa Zulu background, and they found it difficult to engage with the content knowledge of whatever you've been teaching in that module, how are you going to revert to their home language to explain those concepts and even the thinking behind the content language? I mean, the content subject. In this case, we can be able to use them as learners because some of them are also speaking that language. Or there will be called machines that could translate whatever that has been said in different languages of our learners. Say, for instance, if there are many Sizulu, Siswati, Sixhosa, Sizulu students in my class at Gqeberha, there's no reason why we can't have simultaneous translation in whatever module or content we're busy. I studied at a university whereby it was bilingual. It was a norm. Whether you send an email, whether you go to conferences, whether you're teaching, there's always a translation. Just like when you're watching your UN meetings, there people are not speaking English. They're speaking a number of languages that are multilingual in the true sense of the word multilingual. And they took charge of making sure that multilingualism is alive. It's unfortunate with us, we just talking about it, we don't acting on it and make it a practical exercise in our institutions that multilingual education lives. So I would say the first point of a call will be to having a translation in our classroom. When I was studying at this university, it was Welsh and English. Those who speak Welsh, the conversation will be, or the talk the discussion will be translated into English simultaneously. Those who speak English will be translated to Welsh simultaneously. Nobody is left behind. Unfortunately, in our classrooms, we leave a number of students behind, and we always wonder why our students are not getting to where they're supposed to at the right time with the right content, because we always push one language, and that language is supposed to fit all. So it needs to go back to zero. How do we come up with ways and strategies, methods of making our classroom multilingual, both for teachers as well as for learners, because our teachers don't have all these languages, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hassan. I want us to watch our watches very closely, because otherwise we are going to lag behind with time.
Sorry.
There's a question. Thank you. There's a comment on the chat from a colleague of mine, Kabelo. Kabelo is saying interesting discussions. However, is enough done to intellectualize or make African languages scientific? Kabelo, really not enough is done, but NWU, I must assure you, is doing something about it. Remember, we have a new language policy, and it's at its implementational stage, and it depends on the lecturers of the NWU to take this challenge and try to make the African languages to be languages of scientific. And from colleague Salome Romilos, she is saying, I agree with Prof. Langa, as social identities are closely linked to academic performance. This can be problematic if these identities are marginalized, as was the case. And Carmen Duplessis says, good point, Erica, laziness is a factor. I've also noticed with assignments that students prefer to make use of English. A bunch of useful English language editing resources available, such as spelling and grammar checkers like with MS Word and Grammarly, etc., as well as programs that automatically compile bibliographies in English. They then choose English as it is easier to execute assignments instead of using their mother tongue. That will obviously implicate more work with editing, translating, and reciting. I think I'm going to close on this question because
may I come in with one point, Dr. Tavane?
Say it again.
May I come in with one point?
Yes, let's be conscious of time. You can come up with one point, and then we close the.
I think I'd like to comment to that question of laziness. Yes, we have to do something about it. It's our language, and if you want, we had to make it alive. And there are so many ways you can make it alive. So let's take up the cudgels and make our languages alive. Thank you.
Dr. Kaisa?
Thank you, Dr. Hassana. And yes, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer or only one strategy that's working for lecturers who don't necessarily share the languages of their students. But towards the end of the session, we are going to have 3 spots where lecturers will share what they've done to promote multilingualism, to share the strategies that they've done towards the end of the session. So we'll have a 15 to 20 minute section there where lecturers from our university will share what they've done, even though they don't share the same mother tongue as many of the students in their classrooms. And they did it amidst the COVID pandemic in an online fashion. So I think some of our lecturers might also be able to provide some answers to the question that we've just discussed. But let's move on to the third question, which was, how should students be encouraged to utilize the language repertoires and prior knowledge that they bring to the class to promote their own learning on tertiary level? Let's hear what our prof said about that.
Have students actually required language repertoires that are relevant for a higher language register that we use in higher education. If most of them have not completed their school education using a language other than English or something that is like English as medium of instruction. Maybe for informal chatting about learning materials and so forth, there might be some benefit to use these low register language repertoires, which students do in any case outside of the classroom. Whether we are actually talking about students using their language repertoires in the high register is questionable, and maybe we should investigate that matter further.
I think the decision for the academy to accept that African languages are one of the pedagogies in the teaching and learning is a symbolic acknowledgement of not just the languages, but the prior knowledge that these languages carry. And so that has an unintended effect of affirming the languages, affirming the students themselves. So access is no longer just the physical access, the enrollment of the students. Access is now complete in the sense that the student actually feels that all that they know, the languages that they have, actually find their position, find their expression in the classroom. And therefore, it makes it easy for students to access the knowledge that is being shared in the learning process. And students then deploy all these instruments, including language and prior knowledge that they are exposed to, and access the knowledge very easily using the instruments that are before them. And the easiest instrument is the linguistic instrument that they already have and can bring to the learning spaces. So it is really indeed encouraged that students utilize the languages that they are bringing to the academy, and all the things that go with language, because language is a system, and the whole system that carries a lot of knowledge. And if you do that, you improve accessibility of knowledge in the academy. You improve accessibility to the academy in a very wider and more deeper sense than just the physical access of being enrolled and registered in a particular program.
While we are waiting for Dr. Hassana Koti, just a minute, while we are waiting for Dr. Hassana to come in, I like the response of Mr. Johan Blau regarding the previous question there, that lecturers must use students who are able, who are linguistically able. And he says one way of relinquishing control where the lecturer does not speak the mother tongues of the students is by in meaning making, moving to and from between the students' mother tongue. Thank you, Dr. Kaiser.
Thank you, Johan. And I mean, Dr. Hassana Johan Blau is also from our language directorate, and he's a simultaneous translator, and they train the simultaneous translators at a university as well. So that strategy that you mentioned in terms of simultaneous translation is also used in some of our classes at the Northwest University. Thank you, Johan. Yes, and again, it brings us back to that skateboarding, you know, the half pipe skateboarding, moving fluidly between the languages or among the languages, if you have more than two in your repertoire, and utilizing those to learn, and utilizing students. And one of our lecturers who will facilitate a table later on in the session also utilized her student facilitator in the mathematics class who could speak Sesotho. to facilitate certain sessions with those mathematics students and to certain assessments and word sums and things. So I think if we start thinking outside the box and we start thinking with our students instead of thinking for them, we might come up with very innovative solutions to utilizing our languages in learning. Dr. Hassana, your response to that question.
Thank you, Dr. Cassia. My response would be, have you ever thought of looking at what best works? Because I think our context is supposed to teach us as well. And using the context as the way to get results to our answers to our problem, that will assist us in knowing what best suits your classroom, the university, as well as what can we, because we're teacher trainers, what can we trickle down to primary schools, high schools, teachers, so that they try these ways of doing and they inform us what they have found, so that it informs practice. Practice also informs theory. So what I would say is, for a way whereby we would look at the best ways to use language repertoires and what are we doing to revive or revitalize those endangered languages, because you'll find out most of African languages are endangered in the sense that they are not used in academic learning. They are just conversational. So again, conversational modules, they're supposed to be introduced to speakers of other languages so that they learn the language, whether they are going to use it just for conversation or be able to use it in the classroom when they want to explain a concept or knowledge that the learners are grappling with in their classrooms. So to me, if we can have best way of revitalizing as well as utilizing the languages in the classroom, that will be a solution that will grow beyond theory, because right now we are still theorizing things. We are not at all at a stage whereby we say this works. I've tried it and my students succeeded in knowing the content language. And also, what are the cognitive multilingual approaches, because we need to get into that space of knowing their cognitive multilingual approaches, methods, and ways of strategies in our classrooms for our learners to succeed in whatever platform where language is central. Because language is, to me, a cube between all these different learning areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, and I think also, Johan, you make a valid point there where you say what Professor Duplessis calls the intolerance of multilingualism. It's a challenge to make students aware of the value of the mother languages. And I think that's also what Salome said previously, Salome Romulus, about your identity and your identity being devalued, or that was devalued in a previous system, and to make students aware of the fact that there's value of bringing your repertoires to the class. They will be valued, they will be respected, and they will be useful to you in your own learning. So thank you for that comment, Johan. I think embracing what you say at the end, embracing the language repertoires of all students present in a class is one way of achieving this. And the first step there would be awareness. I don't know whether I missed any comments there.
No, you have not missed anything. Koti, you are on the right track, because I see you have switched to Johan's comment there. You may talk, you may speak. You wanted
Yes,
to
and
say
I
something?
also think one of our table facilitators, Mrs. Darnell Kruger, also very innovatively made use of a Mentimeter and the G Suite, which she'll explain at the end of the session in how she used that in her classrooms. But she also observed while she was part of our course that students were hesitant to contribute their phrases and their words and their terminologies in their mother tongue on that Mentimeter or using on Google Docs or whatever applications she used. And I think, again, what Johan said is, as lecturers, we need to create that awareness. We need to promote that. We need to show the students that this is valuable to you. This is valuable for your cognitive development. And then after awareness has been created, the students might be more, keen to take part and to contribute to create those Mentimeters, those word clouds, those words that come from their language that would also contribute to what they're learning in the classroom. So thank you very much. Let's move on to our next question, Dr. Dlavani.
Thank you, Dr. Kesar. What I'm gathering now is that there's now another leg which should focus on the students themselves, their perceptions, and making them aware of the benefits of learning through their languages. Okay, let's go to the next question, which is, how can we intellectualize African languages when African language speakers themselves have never learned through the medium of their mother tongues before they enter the university? What is your view on language harmonization of African languages? Let us watch the responses from Professor Langa and Professor Theo Duplessis.
About the intellectualization of African languages. I suppose you are talking about the intellectualization of the Sintu languages. As we know, there are a variety of African languages spoken on the continent, some highly intellectualized, such as French, and others less so, such as Nama. And I'm not sure who you refer to when you refer to we. Universities? Anyway, in the case of the intellectualization of Afrikaans, the insistence by students on using Afrikaans, since it was already used in schools, have prompted a range of language organizations and eventually also universities to become involved in the intellectualization project. In other words, we are talking here about both bottom-up and bottom-down language planning, but essentially the need came from below, and this was during the 10s, 20s of the previous century. I'm afraid the well-established and actually entrenched functional load of English in the higher register in higher education in South Africa will be very difficult to overturn without a mass-inspired drive from below to use the Sintu languages as media of instruction from the day schooling starts right through to university level, as is done in the case of Afrikaans schooling. Incidentally, sign language is one of the exceptions where this language is used in some schools of the deaf as medium of instruction right through schooling, and now also in classes at university through interpreting in a variety of classrooms, variety of subjects, and where the terminology is actually developed on a daily basis with the help of students but also other role players. And here I think Stellenbosch University is taking the lead. Then the question about language harmonization. One can ask the same question about harmonizing Afrikaans and Dutch, also closely related languages. In fact, we actually have had such a project during the process of officializing Afrikaans also in the early 1920s of the previous century. The movement then was called Simplified Dutch. It failed for various reasons, which I won't discuss now, but nevertheless, from a clinical language planning point of view, it did make sense. Incidentally, there still today are people claiming Afrikaans belongs with Dutch. I'm translating directly. So yes, from a language planning point of view, it does make sense to harmonize closely related languages. But again, such a need should be articulated from below. Some of you may recall the rather unsavory discussions at the Durban Language in Davos. This was in the days when we were still dreaming and celebrating, dreaming about and celebrating our newly born democracy, where these discussions were about the proposed system of using official languages from the same language families on a rotational system. For instance, 4 laws during 1 week use the 4 Nguni languages on a rotational system. At any rate, universities cannot really do anything about harmonization other than for academic interest, unless the affected language communities demand it, and then of course participate in the whole harmonization process.
First of all, the intellectualization of African languages is a very complex process. The process to intellectualize a language is to develop the lexicon, is to develop the grammars, the things that are necessary for that language to function in a particular domain. And therefore, that process cannot just be limited in a classroom, because language, unlike any lab experiment, is not something that you can confine within a space and say you are going to develop it. It's a whole process of bringing people from home into a particular space with a particular complexity and try and make this language interact with the knowledge complexity that we are always dealing with. And it is only that way that language and knowledge or knowledge systems that we know interact, that a language can begin to develop the capacity to develop discourses about that knowledge or knowledge system. So it is vitally important that the process of intellectualization is seen not just as an event, but a whole process that requires a longitudinal way of development rather than an experimental lab type of development. And the question of harmonization is a very interesting question because African languages, as we know them, they have, especially those of the Bantu ancestry, they have similarities. And if you want to harmonize the writing systems, not languages, because languages, they carry a lot of embodiments. They embody culture, they embody identity, they embody all sorts of nuanced complexities. But when you are harmonizing orthographies, you are harmonizing the writing systems. And because these writing systems were developed by a set of skilled linguists in some instances, and in some instances it was just missionaries who were not trained in the orthographies, in the writing systems, that actually put and designed these orthographies to be actually different languages. So the process of really harmonizing African languages can serve in the long run in the development of literatures that can be used by a wider audience using a writing system that actually accommodates the sound systems of most of these Bantu groups of languages. So, for instance, in the Guni group of languages, which includes Isxhosa, Isindebele, Isizulu, Siswati, you can actually harmonize these orthographies, these writing systems, and come up with a single writing system, and then develop a single textbook that can take care of the readership in these different language areas. You have not harmonized the people, you have not harmonized the cultures, you have only harmonized the writing system, the orthography, so that whatever literature is developed using that writing system, it can serve the language groups that I have identified. And so it's a very excellent way of uniting the writing systems in order to develop a single writing system that can serve various language groups. It's a very complex subject, which I would really be happy to discuss in more detail than I have the time here. I thank you.
Let us wait for Dr. Kaiser and Dr. Hassana. It looks like I thought Dr. Hassana is out. To save time, Dr. Hassana will come to the chats hereafter. What
Okay.
is your comment on that question?
Thank you, Dr. Labane. I think Prof has been highlighting the question of sign language. And unfortunately, we haven't taken care of. I have been asking this question. What language do they use when they are signing? Is it monolingual? Is it multilingual? Is it bilingual? Is it isiXhosa, isiZulu, like African, or is it European? And it was interesting to find out that I get many diverse answers. I'll leave that for another discussion at some other stage, because we need to delve into sign languages. What languages do they use, so that they can also be part of our curricula in schools, primary schools up to university. Now, let me come back to the point of harmonizing African languages. Yes, I believe in interactive approach. It's supposed to start with the people who are speaking the language, or the languages, because you also have language groups. And then we go up to how do we standardize them using our constitutional and language policies. Because if you don't do that, we will never be able to have any harmonization in these African languages. It has started some time ago when we were introduced into language policies curriculum sometime in 1996. But it's not moving in the pace that it's supposed to. We are trying by all means as African language lecturers to follow the constitution as well as the policies. But now, what is important, because African languages, when it comes to technology, digitalization, we're still falling short. And to me, that is the instrument that will also help us develop and use the language, and also be able to see how best can we develop it further to harmonize it. So to me, resources, which is digital platforms, media, Department of Education, as well as a institution of higher learning, they're supposed to take this as an active project, which is not an event, but a process. And within that process, we are working with all the stakeholders, because we need to harmonize African languages. And unfortunately, without resources, we can never be able to do so. I also wanted to know more about human languages technologies, because I see that as another instrument that will enable us to harmonize African languages. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hassana. I see a comment from Salome Romilos. I believe one should not be discouraged by the difficulty as mentioned by Professor Duplessis, but then indeed drive the intellectualization of African languages, both in a top-down and bottom-up manner, with all stakeholders buying in. A top-down approach will formalize this and ensure implementation. I do agree with Salome, because if initiatives do not come from the grassroots, then it's going to be very difficult to start the process, actually, and even to, realize the importance of intellectualizing African languages. I think it's Ms. Kotikaiser, Dr. Kotikaiser.
Should we go on? Dolly, do you want to ask something else?
No, not something else.
Okay.
I think we should go to...
Yes, Salome, and the whole idea of the top-down, bottom-up that needs to happen at the same time, and we need to coordinate in such a way that we don't miss one another. When we started with this project on multilingual pedagogies, simultaneously at the Faculty of Arts, they started with the unit and worked with Sadilar to start developing terminology. But as you can see, if the terminology comes from the top down, but it's not used in the classes from the bottom up, we miss one another, and there's no intellectualization of the language that's happening. So in a way, this process also needs to be streamlined, the top down and the bottom up, so that we don't miss one another. Okay, so now we're moving to the more final part of our session, which is going to be a bit more interactive and practical, as I've already hinted. So we have 3 stations at the bottom of your screen, which are labeled with different strategies that could be useful in utilizing different languages. You'll see there's language portraits, the G suites, using facilitation and translation. And you can now opt to join a specific table at those pods at the bottom of your screen. Unfortunately, we only have 5 people per table, so you need to double click at the table, but please don't do that right now. You can just first have a look. And then Dr. Dlavane will introduce the 3 lecturers who will be presenting at those tables.
Oh, okay. The lecturers who continue to make efforts to realize the language repertoires and provide their students knowledge in their home languages by using unique multilingual pedagogies are our own colleagues in the Faculty of Education in the School of Language Education. And they are Mrs. Danielle Kruger, who lectures business studies, and Ms. Chantel Kruger, who lectures Afrikaans for education, and also Ms. Erika Potgieter from the subject group Mathematics Education. Thank you.
Okay, so unfortunately, we only have those 3 stations. And as we did not know how many people were going to attend the session, there might not be enough seats at those stations. For the rest of you, you can remain at your tables, and Dr. Dlavane and I will visit your tables to discuss issues which we perhaps missed or which need a bit more time during the time that those strategies are discussed and demonstrated at those tables. So you can just now choose a table, double click at the table, and then if you can't find a space there, please remain at your table. And then you will be reminded to come back at 5 to 12 when we will wrap up this session. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, it seems like many of you were very rudely interrupted and
Yes.
you couldn't finish your sessions.
Yes, we could not finish with Danielle.
But we also have, all 3 of these lecturers have now have provided us with pre-recordings of these strategies, which we'll showcase in this afternoon session. So I'm really sorry that we had to cut it short, and yeah, but we have to wrap up the session. Dr. Dlavane, will you start?
Dr. Kaiser, I do not have much to say. All I can say is just to thank the lecturers who were willing to share with us their strategies that they use in class with their students in order for them to access knowledge in their modules. I just want to thank everybody who managed to join the session, and it shows that we have much food for thought. Thank you very much.
And before we say goodbye, we would just like to thank everyone who took part in this session. Dr. Dlavani, thank you for preparing and presenting this session with me in a very, very busy week. And I would also like to give special thanks to Dr. Hassana, who was still ill last week and who had quite a number of technological challenges just to get onto this session today.
Yes.
So we really appreciate your time and your efforts to be part of this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Dr.
And I think this is a project that needs our attention. It can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hassana.
Can Dr. Hassana join us in the afternoon, I guess?
Yes.
Okay.
If she's still available, then Dr. Hassana can join us for our 2 to 4 session. But I would really like to thank Mrs. Erika Potgieter, Mrs. Amel Creer, and Ms. Chantal Creer, who shared their multilingual practices during the table sessions. These brave academics implemented these strategies last year amidst a number of challenges associated with COVID and online teaching, and we are in awe of their perseverance, creativity, and resilience. And we are looking forward to showcasing those strategies again this afternoon. And thank you to Dr. Alma Marais, who helped with the editing and uploading of the videos, and Ms. Jackie Bonello and her team from Millennium for their patient and professional technical support. There's a related session scheduled for tomorrow at 10 o'clock on the International Bakondu project, which will touch on similar issues, but with a more global perspective. And you are welcome to register for that session on our website as well. And we also have a session this afternoon that I've already mentioned from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, in which we will showcase more strategies and ideas already incorporated by lecturers at our university and abroad to those who would like to talk more about the implementation of multilingual pedagogies in higher education. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye.
Bye, Dr.